Welcome, dreamers. If you're here, maybe you're tired. Maybe your mind has been spinning for too long. Tonight, let these words be your silence. The weight beneath my flame, I used to think that burning meant power, that if I burned hot enough, loud enough, I could silence everything inside me. But fire doesn't forget it, only devours quietly what you no longer protect. My anger once held me together, each flicker a stitch in a body unraveling. I dressed it in purpose, in pride, in poetry. No one noticed I was already ash beneath my smile. People praised the way I carried pain with elegance, unaware that grace is often just exhaustion in disguise. I learned to glow without warmth, shine without direction. Some nights, I feel the smoke curled in my lungs, and I wonder if I am breathing or being burned slowly from the inside. What is left of me when the blaze settles? And still, I rise not to conquer, but to survive another evening of silence dressed as strength. The weight beneath my flame has a name, but I stopped saying it out loud. Elegy for a battle unseen. I fought wars in mirrors, in memories, in midnight thoughts sharpened like blades. The battlefield was always internal, but the wounds bled into everything I touched. No one hands you a medal for surviving yourself. There are no crowds, no anthems, only your breath echoing against the walls of your chest. Sometimes I think healing feels more like surrender than victory. I did not win, I simply stopped fighting and called it peace. But even surrender demands courage. To lay down your weapons, to tend to your own scars with the hands you once used to harm. This elegy isn't for the panicked S, for the part of me that held the line long after it should have broken. That part deserves to be remembered. What the silence didn't kill, the silence didn't save. MIT paused me. Like a breath before the plunge, it kept my heart floating above itself, refusing to sink too fast. They thought I was calm, but quiet is just grief with no witness. Inside, I was noise-rattling chains, broken chords, the static hum of unanswered questions. I whispered truths into notebooks I never finished, not because I was afraid to end them, but because endings felt too much like conclusions, and I wasn't ready for that. Some wounds don't cry out, they echo slowly over years, through the shape of the way we hold ourselves at rest. And yet, the silence didn't kill me. I lived through its weight and came out heavier, but whole. There's something sacred in surviving the things no one sees. Bleed me in metaphor. I've hidden pain in verses, coded in metaphors, too dense to unwrap. Not because I wanted to confuse, but because clarity hurts more than poetry ever could. When I bled, it wasn't red, it was ink. Every wound wrote itself across the margins of my silence. I didn't scream, I published. People read me like I was healing. They mistook rhythm for recovery, rhyme for resilience. But not every poem is a triumph. Some are tombstones. I've buried parts of myself in stanzas, hoping they'd stay dead. But memory doesn't die in the dark. It reprints itself each night in my chest. And so I bleed again, one syllable at a time. It's not survival, it's surrender with punctuation. The mirror fought back. I stood in front of the mirror, and it didn't. Replica saw resistance, refusal, a version of me tired of pretending to be whole. There's a violence in reflection that no one warns you about. To see clearly is to confront every mask you've worn as protection. I shattered it once, hoping that breaking it would mean breaking free. but it only multiplied my image into jagged truths I couldn't escape. I tried glue, tried forgiveness, tried forgetting, but shards never become smooth again. They just cut you differently when you get too close, and yet I still look, because somewhere in the cracks I recognize the fighter I was forced to become. I name my scars. Each scar has a name, a story, a chapter I didn't mean to write but couldn't erase. Some are letters, others entire novels. I used to hide them, wear sleeves in summer, smiles in sorrow. Now I wear them like medals, one in battles no one saw. There's one above my heart I named almost, another near my ribs called Stayed Too Long, and the deepest one that's still breathing. These are not decorations, they are declarations, proof that the war passed through me but didn't keep me. If you look closely, you'll see I am made more of healing than of harm, and that is no small victory. Ruins can still sing. They looked at me and saw damage, decay, something that used to stand, but ruins have acoustics that palaces never will. Inside what's broken, echoes live longer. I learned that survival isn't silence, it's the resonance that follows collapse. I've sung in spaces where light barely enters, not to be heard, but to remind myself I still have a voice. Don't pity the ruin. It has weathered storms, seen kingdoms fall, and still holds sky within its bones. Let me sing, not because I'm whole, but because I'm still hearing that melody matters. Love was a wound I kept scratching. It started soft like warmth on winter skin. But even comfort can become corrosive if you stay too long. I mistook intensity for intimacy. The flames felt like passion until I couldn't tell the difference between burning and being burned. I kept going back, not because it healed me, but because pain was familiar, and I feared peace wouldn't recognize me. You became the wound I wouldn't let close. I kept scratching, hoping something real would surface beneath the hurt. Now I bleed alone, not because you left, but because I stayed long after the fire went cold. My chest, a quiet battlefield. There was a war I fought without enemies, just the echo of myself in too many mirrors. Pain didn't knock, it nested, soft and persistent like smoke that forgets to leave. I turned my chest into a fortress, then forgot how to open the gates. Every attempt at love felt like opening old wounds just to prove they still bled. And yet I remained beaten, breathless, but unbroken beneath the dust. I never learned to lay down my sword. I never learned to lay down my sword, not because I'm brave, but because I was always taught that stillness invites danger. Even in my sleep, my fingers twitch like they're gripping something invisible. Like I'm still in battle with shadows I haven't named. Like I'm afraid peace might leave me more exposed than war ever did. Every relationship felt like a ceasefire I didn't trust. Words of comfort landed like enemy scouts do, soft, too quiet. When you've built yourself in armor, kindness feels like sabotage. So I tightened my jaw, nodded politely, and retreated behind the silence I know how to wear. People said I was strong, but they didn't see me flinch at love, didn't notice how I braced before every embrace, waiting for warmth to turn into warning. I never learned to lay down my sword, but sometimes I dream of forgetting where I put it. Maybe that's a start. I gave the fire a name. They say you shouldn't name what can burn you, but I gave the fire your name anyway. At first, it kept me warm. Late night words, your voice like kindling, the illusion of being held. But warmth and heat our cousins, and heat forgets to ask before it devours. I stayed too long, thought I could dance with flame and not lose skin. Thought my love could be fireproof if I just believed hard enough. Now I carry the scent of ash in my memories, still tender, still burnt, but I never stopped whispering your name to the smoke. My body forgot how to rest somewhere along the way. My body forgot how to rest. Sleep feels like surrender, and I've never trusted anything that asks me to fall. I lie in bed like a soldier, waiting for the next blow. Even dreams are rehearsals for endings. Even silence echoes like footsteps I can't place. Every ache a whisper of something unfinished. My shoulders tight with stories I never told. My spine curved like a question I'm too tired to ask. They say rest is healing, but what if the wound is in the act of stopping? What if my momentum is the only thing holding me up? I want peace, but first I have to learn how to be still without feeling like I'm dying. Elegance in ashes, they admired how I carried my ruin, how I wrapped grief in rhythm, how I wept in metaphor, how I stood in flame and called it a performance. They called me elegant, but elegance is often just the quietest way to fall apart. I wanted to scream not in verse, not in stanza, but raw, cracking, ugly. But I'd trained myself in silence too long to forget the choreography. Now, I sit with my ashes. I don't brush them away. They are all that's left of the fire I refused to share. I became the scar. At first, I tried to heal, clean the wound, patch the skin, forget the break. But healing implies returned, and I never returned. I became the scar. Raised and quiet, tougher than the skin that came before, but never quite soft again. People touched me and expected wholeness, but scars are not symbols of closure. They're evidence, they're warnings, they're maps. I carry mine like a language. Not everyone understands it, but those who do know exactly where I've been. The kind of fire that doesn't warm. I used to think all fire brought light, but some fires only cast shadows. They dance on walls, create illusions of warmth while leaving the room cold. I loved someone like that. A fire that flickered just enough to make me believe. I stepped closer, held out my hands, and waited to feel something real. But the closer I got, the colder it became. Now I know. Not every flame deserves oxygen. Not every heat is meant to hold you. I survived the beautiful things to people talk about surviving pain. But no one tells you how hard it is to survive beauty that didn't stay. The way someone looked at you once, like you were sunlight after rain. The kind of tenderness that touches bone and then disappears like mist. That kind of beauty haunts. It's not violent, but it echoes. You walk past mirrors and see who you were when you were loved like that. And surviving it, it's not about moving on. It's about remembering without sinking, smiling without breaking, loving again without expecting rescue. I never danced with peace. Peace stood across the room from me, delicate and open-handed, but I couldn't cross the floor. My steps were shaped by warning, not rhythm. I moved like someone used to dodging, not dancing. Every soft gesture felt like bait. Every invitation, a trap waiting to close. I rehearsed happiness in secret, tried on laughter like borrowed shoes. But joy never fit right on bones bent by memory. Somewhere in me, the music played gently, but louder was the voice that whispered, "Stay ready." And so I did. I never danced with peace. I only watched it sway from a distance, too afraid I'd ruin its song. the apology I never deserved. It never came, the apology, the recognition, the moment someone saw what they did and felt it hit back. I stopped expecting it. But expectation isn't the same as healing. One pretends, the other rebuilds. So I wrote it myself, an apology in my own voice. Not to them for me, for staying, for shrinking, for softening myself to be easier to hold. Forgiveness isn't always release. Sometimes it's refusal to let the wound define you. The apology I never deserved became the boundary I never broke again. I built a fortress from regret. Regret came slowly, like moss on stone. At first, barely there. Then, all at once, it softened everything. I didn't notice how high the walls were getting until no one's voice could reach me. I told myself it was safety, it was solitude, but it was fear, painted as independence, silence dressed as strength. I lived behind it for years, waving from a window no one could see through. And only when it started crumbling did I understand. A fortress can be a home if it locks you out too. When my voice returned, there was a silence in me I thought eternal, not peaceful, not sacred, just heavy, just stuck. Words used to catch in my throat like thorns. I had so much to say and no air to say it with. But one day it cracked small at first. A sentence whispered, unsure, a truth I couldn't keep buried. And when my voice returned, it was different, shaky but defiant, like something that had survived drowning. Now, I speak not to fill space, but to reclaim it, the weight of being almost loved. There's a heaviness in being almost chosen. It stays longer than rejection. It whispers, you were close. I remember the softness of your words, the way they almost touched something real. I replayed our almosts like lullabies, but they kept me awake, not comforted, always reaching, never arriving. To be almost loved is to carry a ghost that never had a name. Now, I leave the door closed. Not because I stopped wanting, but because I deserve to be let in, not left near. I measured love in apologies. I thought love was saying sorry and staying. Thought survival meant enduring whatever came with the promise of not being alone. I accepted blame like payment, folded my boundaries into excuses. I made myself small to keep the peace that never showed up. Each apology I gave cost me a little more, not just pride, but presence. I started vanishing beneath good intentions. But one day I ran out, not of apologies, of self. And in the quiet after the last one, I heard myself breathing again, and that felt like truth. The mirror lied kindly some days. The mirror was my friend. It showed me stability in the shape of familiarity. A face I knew how to wear. But beneath the skin was a tremble. A storm too polite to surface. The kind that waits for midnight. I got good at reflecting strength I didn't feel. At convincing even my own reflection I was fine. But the mirror lied kindly, never mocking, never loud, just complicit, until I turned away and finally saw myself. I wrote my way out. No one heard me when I spoke, so I learned to write louder than I could scream. The page never looked away. It didn't flinch at my confession or shame me for bleeding where no one else saw wounds. I poured everything into lines, rivers of what I couldn't say out loud. Ink became my echo, my rebellion. And over time, the pen felt more like a lifeline than a tool. I wrote my way out, and I never looked back. Hope in the shape of scars. They told me hope was light, but I found it in the dark. In the way my wounds closed, crooked, imperfect, but closed. Hope wasn't in the beginning. It was in what remained, in the pulse that persisted after impact. I started seeing beauty in the broken, not in being shattered. Scars became constellations I could navigate by, each one a story that didn't end at pain. That's what hope is to me now. A spark, but a survival. Not a dream, but a direction. I loved in Morse code. I didn't say it outright. I blinked it, paused too long in your presence, held breath like a letter I couldn't send. My affection came in signals too subtle to be obvious, too desperate to be missed. You didn't speak my language, or maybe you did and chose silence. Still, I tapped love across the table, through the pauses, in every small kindness I left unclaimed. And though you never answered, I know I loved you, and that was fluent enough. When comfort becomes a cage, what starts as safety can become prison. Familiarity tightens when it's never questioned. I stayed too long in a room that stopped breathing with me. I called it home even as it shrank. Comfort numbed me. Routine replaced intention. I forgot what desire sounded like. Leaving was terrifying, but staying was erasure. Now I search for spaces that change with me, not walls that ask me to disappear inside them. The kindness that wounded you were never cruel. That's what made it worse. Your gentleness was sharp because I trusted it too quickly. You offered words like blankets, but some warmth suffocates. I didn't see it until I couldn't move beneath it. It wasn't betrayal, it was erosion, slow, soft, almost beautiful. And when I left, I still felt guilty, as if I'd wronged the hand that brushed my hair while undoing my spine. Now I know, not every soft thing is safe, and kindness without truth is just another form of harm. The places I broke quietly, I broke in rooms no one saw, in conversations where I smiled and said I'm fine like a reflex. The loudest cracks don't echo. They settle in the silence after people walk away. I folded myself into polite shapes, grieved without sound, learned to disappear while still being present. They never noticed, but I did. I watched myself vanish in layers until I wasn't sure what was left. Now I'm rebuilding. Not louder, just more honest. The ghost I became for you, you didn't ask me to vanish. I did it myself. Little by little, I dimmed to fit your brightness. I erased pieces of myself to make room for your needs. I called it love. It was loss. You never noticed the empty spaces where I used to be. And by the time I realized it, I was more echo than person. I thought if I stayed long enough, you'd see me. But I was haunting a home that no longer held me. Now I'm learning to be solid again, and I won't vanish for anyone else. I am what remains, not what broke me, not who left, not the weight of what never arrived. I am what stayed after the fall, what picked itself up, cracked but conscious. There's a dignity in endurance, a poetry in persistence. I used to seek closure like a destination. Now I seek movement. No matter how slow, I am what remains. And that is more than enough. I forgot what home felt like. I stopped calling places home when I realized walls can hold silence louder than screams. I carried my comfort in pieces, never putting them down long enough to feel safe. The couches I sat on never softened. The beds I laid in never knew my shape. I was always one breath away from leaving. I memorized exits more than layouts. Learned to smile like I wasn't already halfway gone. Every time I tried to stay, something inside me twitched like it knew this wasn't it either. Maybe home isn't a place. Maybe it's the moment you stop bracing for impact. A hunger I couldn't name it. Wasn't food, it wasn't touch. It wasn't validation or love in the way they said I needed. It was a hunger that sat behind my ribs, quiet, old, insistent, something older than memory, louder than thought. I tried to feed it with noise, with company, with accomplishments dressed as fulfillment, but it grew louder in stillness. It whispered during applause. It ached in the best moments. And I still don't know what it is, but I'm learning to sit with it instead of running. The applause that didn't save me, they clapped loudly. Often I smiled like it meant something. But applause doesn't reach the parts of you that don't feel seen. It bounces off masks and echoes in emptiness. I built my worth on their cheers and wondered why I still felt hollow in the quiet. Their love was real, maybe, but it never filled the cracks I kept hidden behind performance. Now I perform less, and sometimes they don't clap. But for once, I believe myself. The armor began to rust. I wore strength like metal, shiny, hard, unquestioned. It worked for a while, kept the pain at bay, made people believe. But I never took it off, even when I slept, even when I loved, even when I broke, and slowly it began to rust. Words stopped bouncing off. The weight became unbearable. I peeled it off one layer at a time. Beneath it, I wasn't weak, just ... real. Now I wear softness as defiance. Let the world come, I'll meet it with skin. I mistook chaos for passion. He was a storm. I was the forest that let him rage. Every shout felt like proof. Every apology, a promise to rebuild. I called it love because it had gravity, because it pulled and flung and made me feel alive. But passion doesn't bruise, and love doesn't leave you shaking. I left the storm behind, and in the quiet, I finally heard myself breathe. Some nights, I don't want to heal. Healing sounds noble. But some nights, I miss the wound, miss the reason to feel something raw. I visit my hurt like an old friend, sit with it, let it speak. I know it's unhealthy, but it's honest. The pain reminds me who I was before I became palatable, before I made peace with things that still hurt. I don't want to be broken forever, but I don't want to forget either. Tonight, I let it ache, and tomorrow, I'll try again. I was taught to be quiet, not directly, but with every raised brow, every glance that said, "Your truth is too loud." So I've swallowed, drowned every no in politeness, let my voice rust from disuse. When I did speak, it trembled, not from fear, but from unfamiliarity. Now I speak anyway, even when it quivers, even when it costs comfort, because silence never protected me. It only made the lies easier to believe. The comfort of almost you were never mine, but you were close. And in that space, I built illusions with the steadiness of devotion. You smiled like it meant more, and I read novels into gestures you forgot by morning. Almost as dangerous, it gives hope without a landing. It offers warmth without shelter. I lived in almost like it was home, but it never had a door for me. Now I want yes, or nothing at all. I stayed too long in the fire. It wasn't bravery, it was denial. It was hoping that if I stood still long enough, it'd stop burning. But fire doesn't love, it consumes. And I mistook my ashes for resilience. I was proud of how much I could take, not realizing I was disappearing. Pain doesn't make you worthy. Surviving doesn't mean you have to stay. I left the fire, and now I'm learning warmth from the sun. I loved you in past tense. I still say your name sometimes, but softer, like it's a secret between me and the silence. You were a chapter one, reread too many times, trying to find a different ending. I didn't stop loving you all at once. I just ran out of places to put the hope. Now, I think of you like a season that ended. Beautiful, necessary, over. I loved you. I did, and that's enough. I waited where you left me. I stayed in the place your silence built. It wasn't love, but it felt like a promise, unspoken. Each day, I rehearsed your return in my mind, practiced the smile, the forgiveness, the relief, but you never came back, and the waiting became who I was. I set a place for you at my table, long after I stopped eating. Now, I've stood up, and the chair where you should have been, I've burned it. The lie I lived in, I called it balance, but it was bending. I called it compromise, but it was silence. I smiled when I was cracking. I stayed when I was breaking. Truth knocked softly at first, then louder, but I had learned to sleep through alarm bells. I lived in a lie because it was furnished with comfort and painted with hope. But lies collapse, and when mine did, I found truth waiting in the rubble. You took my words, not by force, but by framing. You rewrote my sentences before they landed. I said, I'm hurt, and you heard, I'm weak. I said enough, and you heard, please stay. So I stopped speaking. Spoke in nods, in exits, in eyes that stopped looking. You didn't notice I went silent. You just enjoyed the quiet. Now my words are mine again, and they no longer whisper, they roar. The softness I lost, I used to cry easily, love openly, forgive too fast. I called it tenderness, but softness became risk, became pain, became the open wound everyone walked over. So I hardened, sharpened, learned to cut before I bled. But sometimes I miss the version of me that bloomed without armor. I'm learning now that softness, isn't weakness, it's a strength. I am relearning. When love hurt more than hate, hate is clean, it's loud, it declares itself. Love, real or imagined, cuts differently. It whispers, it confuses. You said you loved me, but I bled more from your affection than from any enemy's blow. Love shouldn't feel like punishment, or test, or guessing game. So I left, not because I stopped loving, but because I started believing I deserved peace. I became the silence. There was a time I shouted, demanded, begged to be heard. But when noise was met with indifference, I became silence itself. Not passive, but strategic. Not absent, but selective. I learned that silence could protect me, could say what screams never could. Now I don't raise my voice, I raise my standards. The version you loved wasn't me. You loved the smile, not the reason behind it. The silence, not the storm it concealed. You loved the version of me that didn't exist, the one sculpted from your hopes, not my truth. I kept up the act. At first to be loved, later out of habit. But pretending is exhausting. And I was never meant to be fiction. I'm real now. And if you don't recognize MIS because you never knew me, I cried without tears. There's a kind of sorrow too deep for water. A mourning that lives in stillness. I sat in crowds and broke quietly, smiled while unraveling. No one asked. Maybe they thought I was strong, or maybe invisible. But I kept breathing, kept showing up, even when everything inside begged to pause. That's a kind of victory too. the survival of the unseen grief. I buried my need for help. Help felt like failure, like admitting the weight was too much, so I carried it alone, stacking responsibility like bricks around my heart. I became so used to the weight that I forgot what lightness felt like. Asking became harder than suffering. Silence became my language. But now I whisper, I need, and in that whisper lives my strength. The war wasn't always outside. They told me to be strong, to fight the world. But no one prepared me for the war inside, the one waged in whispers and doubts. I fought shadows no one saw, lost battles before I even rose from bed. I wore medals for showing up when my heart wanted to flee. And that, I've learned, is a kind of heroism too. I grew around the pain. Pain didn't leave, so I stopped waiting for its exit. Instead, I built myself around it like roots around a stone. I learned to breathe beside it, to laugh while it hummed in the background. It shaped me, yes, but it didn't own me. I made room for joy too, even if it had to sit beside sorrow. People said I seemed stronger, but I wasn't stronger. I was practiced. Now I bloomed through the cracks it left behind. I was the storm this time. I've always braced for impact, dodging lightning meant for someone else's sky. But this time, I was the thunder, the wind, the shake in the ground. I unleashed everything I buried beneath politeness and survival. It wasn't rage, it was release. And it felt like truth. Sometimes, to rebuild, you must first become what others fear. The ache that didn't leave, not sharp, not loud, just ... constant. A hum beneath every thought. I tried to outrun it, dress it up, make it poetry, but it stayed. Some aches aren't wounds, they're echoes, reminders of things too deep to forget. People asked if I was okay. I said yes, because I didn't have the words for maybe. So I carry it, not as burden but as memory that shaped my rhythm. I forgot how to want. Need was easy. It screamed, it clawed, it demanded attention. But want, that was tender, it whispered. It knocked instead of breaking in. Somewhere along the way, I traded dreams for endurance, traded passion for predictability. Now I'm trying to want against to want without apology. Because life shouldn't just be tolerated, it should be touched with longing. The smile that hid the storm, I became skilled at the kind of smile that fools cameras and people alike. It wasn't fake, it was selective. Like showing only the clean rooms in a burning house. They called me happy. I nodded. Meanwhile, I was drenched in silent thunder. It's not dishonesty, it's survival. Some storms are quieter than tears, but I'm learning now to open the windows, let someone see the rain. I named my grief for a long time. It followed me like a shadow, without form, just presence. Then, one day, I gave it a name, not to own it, but to face it. Naming grief doesn't tame it, but it lets you talk to it without fear. I say its name like a memory, not a monster. And in return, it lets me move without forgetting. I dream in wounds. My dreams aren't escapes. They're reflections, sometimes sharper than reality. I see the people I miss, not as they were, but as they linger in pain. I wake with bruises I can't explain, with truths I forgot to hide from myself. Even asleep, I fight battles I thought were buried. But maybe healing begins when we stop fearing the dreams. The love, I didn't recognize it, didn't look like the stories. It wasn't grand, loud, or written in skywriting. It showed up in silence, in patience, in the way they waited without demand. I almost missed it, distracted by old wounds shaped like passion. But when I paused, I saw this was love too. Quieter, safer, and maybe that's the kind worth staying for. I bled without breaking. Not every wound opens wide. Some seep beneath skin, unseen but certain. I held myself together with threads of habit and hope. They saw me whole, never suspecting I was leaking light. But I moved, I created, I healed in increments, not declarations. And that quiet recovery, that was a revolution too. I found beauty in the scar. It wasn't immediate. At first, I hated what it meant, what it remembered. But time softened it, gave it new shape, new narrative. It wasn't failure, it was proof that I lived, that I survived. The scar became a landmark, a signifier in my own history. Now I wear it without shame, like a signature only I understand. The fight I couldn't win, not because I wasn't strong, but because some battles aren't meant to be won, they meant to be walked away from. I stayed too long, thinking endurance was victory. But fighting isn't always brave. Sometimes letting go is. I left with wounds, yes, but also with wisdom. Now I choose peace over trophies I never needed. I wasn't built for silence. I tried. For years I tried. Bit my tongue until it bled truth. Silence made them comfortable, but made me invisible. Every unspoken word sat on my chest like bricks. So I broke the silence not with rage, but with return. Now I speak, even when it trembles, even when it's not welcomed. I miss who I was before survival, before the need to be strong. I was soft, curious, unafraid to need. Then came the lessons, the pain, the expectations that hardened me. I don't resent who I became, but I mourn who I left behind. Sometimes I catch glimpses of here in laughter, in art, in trust. I want her back, or at least a place where we can coexist. The quiet that remains, after the tears dry, after the doors close, after the goodbye settles, there is a quiet, not peaceful, but present. It doesn't rush, doesn't explain, just lingers, like smoke after flame. I feared it at first, then I learned to listen to it. Now, in the quiet, I meet myself anew. I made peace with the ghost. It haunted me for years, the memory, the mistake, the version of me that didn't stay. I fought it, denied it, tried to erase it, but it followed, quiet and patient, waiting for me to turn around. And when I did, it didn't hurt, it simply nodded. Now we walk together, not enemies, but witnesses of the same past. I let the silence teach me. I used to fear the silence, thinking it meant absence, neglect, abandonment. But in silence, I heard my own voice more clearly, not the one I used for others, the real one. It whispered truths too quiet to survive the noise. What I needed, what I lost, what I could reclaim. Silence became a mirror, not a punishment. It reflected the pieces I'd been too loud to notice. Now I sit with it, not in fear, but in reverence, because in the quiet, I remember who I am. I wasn't built for half-love. They offered pieces, and I tried to make them whole. Tried to believe fragments could fill me. But half-love only teaches you how to shrink, to edit yourself into someone more digestible. I became a version of myself that smiled through craving and settled for almost. Then I realized I wasn't wrong for wanting more. I was just asking the wrong people. Now I'd rather wait in solitude than be touched by hands that tremble to commit. I danced with the shadow. There's a part of me I buried, dark, chaotic, relentless. I thought hiding it made me worthy. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It waits, watches, and grows. One day, I stopped running. I turned toward it and reached out. It didn't devour me, it danced. And I learned to move with the parts I feared. I am not the light alone. I am the whole eclipse, and that's where my power lives. The goodbye I never got you left without words, just an echo where a promise used to be. I waited for closure, as if it would arrive like a package neatly tied, clearly labeled. But closure doesn't come from the one who left. It comes from the one who stayed and still heals. So I wrote your goodbye for you, not as revenge, but as release. Now, when I think of you, I don't flinch, I breathe, and that's enough. I became the poet of my pain. I didn't choose the wounds, but I chose to give them language. Each poem bled a little, but it also built something, lines that housed my grief, my hope, my healing. People read and said, beautiful, not knowing the beauty was born of survival. I used words like thread, stitching together parts of me that once couldn't touch. Now, my sorrow has a voice, and that voice sounds like me, bruised, bold, still breathing. I'm not the villain you needed. You painted me cruel so you wouldn't have to face your own reflection. It was easier to blame me than admit you ran from the love I gave freely. But I won't carry the guilt that wasn't mine. I won't shrink to make your story neat. I wasn't perfect, but I was real, and I gave more than I took. So write your version. I'll live mine with peace, not permission. I tried to be easy to love. I dimmed my thoughts, smoothed my edges, swallowed my needs, because I thought love required silence, not honesty. I became agreeable, digestible, the version of me that wouldn't scare anyone away. But in doing so, I lost myself in the quiet I created. Now I want love that sees me loud and stays anyway. The fire that didn't kill me, it burned through everything I thought I needed. Plans, people, parts of myself I'd outgrown. At first, I mourned the loss, clinging to ash as if it held comfort. But fires don't only destroy, they also clear the way for new soil. I rose not as the same, but as something earned, something chosen. Now I don't fear the fire. I know how to rise from it. I am the aftermath. People romanticize the storm, but rarely speak of the silence that follows. I am what remains when chaos leaves tender, trembling, still standing. I clean up the debris of what I thought would last. I stitch up what the winds tore open. The aftermath is quiet work, lonely work, but it is where truth lives. And in that space, I build again, not what was, but what could be. I carried too much, not just bags or tasks, but people, secrets, expectations I never agreed to. I said yes to ease the weight of others, even as I sank. They called me strong, but it was just silence stretched into sacrifice. Now, I'm learning to put things down, to let people carry their own stories, because I deserve lightness, to not just resilience. I remember me before the mask. There was a time I didn't edit my joy, didn't dilute my pain. I laughed with abandon. I cried without apology. I existed without explanation. Then came performance, smiling when I ached, nodding when I needed to scream. But the memory of that unmasked self still flickers beneath the roles, and I'm ready to let her return. Not perfect, just present. I outgrew the cage at first. It felt like protection, safe walls, familiar routines. But safety became suffocation. Familiarity became a leash I couldn't see. I stretched, I questioned. I cracked the walls with my wondering. They said, "You've changed," as if that was betrayal. But change was survival. I didn't escape the cage. I evolved beyond it. I let the past breathe. I used to keep it locked away, fearing its weight, its reach. But the past doesn't vanish. It waits for space, for acknowledgement. I stopped fearing the memories. I opened the window and let them speak. They didn't scream, they sighed. They whispered lessons I'd missed. Now we coexist. The past and I no longer enemies, but uneasy companions. The truth I hid from myself. I told others I was fine so often. I started believing the costume. But truth isn't silent forever. It knocks first, gently, then urgently. One day, I looked in the mirror and couldn't find myself beneath the script. So I peeled it away line by line, mask by mask. Now I speak truths that shake because silence nearly broke me. I deserve the calm. I've lived in chaos so long. I thought peace was boring, unsafe even. But calm isn't the absence of energy, it's proper direction. I don't need a life that excites with disaster. I want one that soothes with truth. There is beauty in soft mornings, quiet hearts, stable hands. And I'm learning that calm doesn't mean empty it. I whispered to the wound. It didn't need fixing. It needed witnessing, presence, not a remedy. I sat beside it, no longer ashamed, and let it tell its story. It spoke in pulses, in aches, in memories I hadn't fully processed. I stopped asking when it would heal and started asking what it needed. Sometimes it just wanted to be heard, and that's when it softened. I lost myself in healing. I chased better relentlessly, as if perfection would undo the damage. Each milestone felt like a checkpoint, not a resting place. But healing isn't a straight line. It curves, it loops, it pauses. I was so focused on becoming whole, I forgot I already was, just differently shaped. Now I heal slower, but truer, with grace instead of urgency. I learned to unlove. No one teaches you how to unlove someone who felt like home. It happens in fragments and forgotten songs, in quiet mornings that don't ache. At first, it feels like betrayal, but then, like release. I didn't erase you. I redefined you from everything to memory, and memory doesn't hold me anymore. It just waves from a distance. I said goodbye without sound. Some goodbyes don't echo. They slip beneath the noise, quiet but final. There were no tears, just a decision. A moment I didn't explain. I left pieces of myself behind, of love, not regret. You didn't notice my departure, and maybe that was the answer all along. Now, in silence, I grieve and grow. Simultaneously, I outlasted the fear. Fear once sat beside me, whispering worst-case endings in every beginning. It dressed as protection, but kept me from moving, from wanting. I obeyed it until I didn't, until stillness hurt more than risk. Fear didn't leave, I just stopped listening. Now, I walk forward with trembling steps and call that courage. I am what remained they left. The storm passed, the voices quieted, and there I was, still here, still breathing, still uncertain. But survival isn't just continuation. It's becoming in the aftermath. I'm the echo of every no I overcame, the whisper of every yes I never heard. And still, I rise imperfect, intact, enough. I was my own rescue. I waited too long for someone to see me breaking, to offer a hand, to notice. But help didn't arrive. So I became the hand I needed. I pulled myself out with words, with rest, with rebellion against silence. It wasn't dramatic, it was daily, quiet decisions to stay, to try, to hope. Now I trust myself to show up when no one else does. I loved quietly. Not everyone love roars. Mine hummed in the background, steady and unspoken. I showed it in gestures, in remembering small details, in sitting through silence. They wanted declarations. One offered devotion in lowercase. They missed it, called it distant. But I know the weight it carried. I don't regret loving quietly. I only regret it not being heard. I watched the flame fade. We burned fast, intense, like we feared the morning. But passion without roots turns to ash. And we mistook fire for foundation. I kept trying to fan what was already embers. Eventually, I stopped blowing on the smoke and let it rest. Some fires are meant to teach, not warm. I released the version of me you needed. I twisted into shapes to fit your vision, tight smiles, small dreams, controlled affection. But contortion isn't love. It's erasure dressed as sacrifice. I lost track of my own wants beneath the weight of yours. When I finally stepped back, I saw the outline of someone else. So I walked away not from you, but from who I wasn't meant to be. I learned to be enough. Validation was currency, and I spent years broke, starving for approval. Each compliment filled a crack, but never sealed it. I built my worth on shaky ground till I stopped outsourcing it. Now I compliment myself. I hold my own hand. One clap in empty rooms. Being enough isn't loud, it's steady, and I am learning its rhythm. I fell in love with solitude. At first, I called it loneliness, a punishment, a void, but time transformed it. Silence became song, emptiness became canvas. I learned to date my own thoughts, to dance without witness. Now, solitude isn't what I endure, it's what I seek, because in my own company, I remember I am whole. Don't apologize anymore for existing loudly, for dreaming recklessly, for needing deeply. I used to edit myself to fit into boxes not built for me, but shrinking never protected me. It only buried my truth. Now, I take up space softly, fiercely, fully, and if that unsettles others, I bless their discomfort and keep blooming. I tasted freedom in letting go. Clinging felt like safety, like certainty, like love. But my fingers grew tired. My grip cut into my own skin. One day I exhaled, released, let the story float away. And in the absence, something new arrived. Peace, breath, possibility. Letting go wasn't loss. It was permission to begin again. I chose the long way home. The shortcut looked tempting. Quick fixes, easy endings. But I needed time. Winding roads, mistakes and lessons folded into detours. I walked slowly, sometimes backwards. I paused more than I ran. But I saw more, learned more, loved myself through every stumble. Now, home feels earned, not just found, but built. I held space for my sadness. I stopped rushing it out, stopped covering it with smiles and distractions. Instead, I welcomed it in, let it sit beside me, without shame. It didn't demand attention, it just needed presence. By holding space, I learned that sadness isn't weakness, it's depth. And in that depth, I found pieces of myself worth saving. I lived in echoes. Every word they said repeated in my head, long after they were gone. I built a world out of echoes, half memory, half longing. Even silence sounded like them, and I couldn't tell where I ended. I had to unlearn their voice to find mine again. Now, my echo belongs to my quiet, but honest. I became my own light. They said I needed saving, that I should wait for rescue. But waiting felt like drowning with my head just above water. So I lit a match in my chest, small and steady. It grew, not into a flare, but a soft lantern. And with that glow, I found the way forward, my way. I buried the apologies. I said sorry for needing, for dreaming, for feeling too deeply. Each apology chipped away at the parts I needed most. But one day, I realized I was apologizing for being human. So I buried the guilt, not the truth. Now I speak with softness, not shame. I remember the weight of hope. Hope isn't light. It's heavy, a burden disguised as belief. But I carried it anyway, even when my hands trembled, because something in me refused to go dark. And now, even in grief, hope glows quietly inside me. I let the rain speak for me. When words felt too sharp, too loud, I stepped into the storm. The rain knew how to say what I couldn't, soft, persistent, cleansing. Each drop felt like a sentence released from my bones. In the rhythm of the sky, I found something honest. Now, when I cry, I think of rain, not weakness. I survived the quiet rejection. Not all abandonment is loud. Some slip through the cracks of silence. They stopped calling. I stopped hoping. The distance did the rest. No fights, no endings. Just space that widened every day. I grieved what never fully lived. I buried what never bloomed. And still, I continued lighter, lonelier, freer. I let go of perfect. Perfect was a costume that never fit, stitched with fear and performance. I chased it like a mirage, always near, never mine. But I was tired of aching for approval that shifted like wind. So I let it go and chose real over flawless. Now I am whole, not ideal, and that feels better. I loved what I couldn't keep. Some things aren't meant to stay, but they're still worth loving. I knew it wouldn't last, yet I poured myself in anyway. Each moment was both joy and goodbye, layered with ache. When it ended, I didn't regret the love, only the goodbye, because even fleeting love teaches us permanence in new ways. I walked away without noise, no slamming doors, no final screams, just quiet steps toward myself. I didn't need a scene to reclaim my worth. My goodbye was internal, a decision wrapped in clarity. They never saw it coming, but I'd been leaving for years, and now I'm gone, even if they still whisper my name. I kept my softness. The world asked me to be hard, to armor up, to survive. But I chose softness, even when it bruised me, because there's strength in staying open while everything says close. I don't regret the tears or tenderness. They are proof I still believe in something gentle. I rested without guilt. Rest used to feel like laziness, like I was falling behind. But exhaustion isn't weakness, and stillness is a right. I laid down not to give up, but to return stronger. Now, I rest as an act of rebellion in a world that demands burnout. And I rise slower, but more whole. I saw myself in the ruins after it all crumbled. I stood among pieces that once defined me. At first, I only saw loss, but then I saw truth. The ruin held roots, foundations I could rebuild upon. I wasn't broken, I was cleared. And in that open space, I began again. I found power in the pause. I used to fear the pause, the moment when nothing moved. But in the stillness, I heard what motion silenced. Clarity came not from chasing, but from breathing. I learned that rest isn't absence, it's presence without pressure. I made peace with the unfinished. Not every story needs an ending to be meaningful. Some connections fade before closure. Some dreams change shape mid-flight. I stopped chasing completion and started honoring process. The unfinished isn't failure, it's a fragment of something still alive. And I am learning to love what's in progress, including me. So I let my guard fall, not for them, but for me. I am the storm and the shelter. Both versions are mine, neither more noble. I contain the chaos and the calm, the wound and the salve. I am not one or the other, I am the whole sky. I counted the scars that saved me. Each mark told a story, not of pain, but of passage. But they reminded me of survival, of return, of learning. I counted not to measure damage, but to honor resilience. Now I wear them like a roadmap of becoming a sat with the version of me that wasn't chosen, the one they passed on, left waiting, ignored, without goodbye. I loved the wrong way before I loved right. I gave too much, too fast. To those who took too easily, I mistook intensity for intimacy, chaos for chemistry. Now I love slower, with eyes open and hands steady, not less deeply, just less destructively. I am still becoming. Some think healing is a destination, a ribbon to cut at the end. But I am always unfolding, layer after layer of rediscovery. Each day reveals something softer, or braver, or undone. I no longer rush the bloom. I honor the unfurling. Becoming isn't linear, it's alive. I broke so I could expand. Cracks didn't ruin me. They made room, space for the light, space for more of myself. I resisted the breaking, but it was inevitable and necessary. Through the fracture, I met my fullness. Now I don't fear breaking, I fear never growing. I let love go gently, not all endings need fire. I folded the goodbye into memory. Love had run its course, not in bitterness, but in silence. We outgrew each other without hatred, and that too is a kind of love worth honoring. I forgave without apology. They never said sorry, never acknowledged the wound. But I needed peace more than I needed justice. I traded answers for presence. I used to demand reasons, explanations, certainty. But some things aren't meant to be solved, just felt. I chose the flame within. They kept looking outside for validation, for heat, for light. But I turned inward, where my fire had waited all along. It flickered through grief and glowed through doubt. And I walk lit from within, even in the dark. I restored the trust I lost in myself. I broke promises to my body, my heart, my voice. Listened to others before I listened to my knowing. But every betrayal taught me how to return home. I started keeping small promises, sleep, breath, truth. Now I trust myself to hold me first. I wrote my way back, and in the ink, I found the way home. I found faith in the flicker. I wanted certainty, but all I had was a fragile spark. It wasn't much, but it was chosen, but constant. That flicker, barely there, held the whole hope. And now, it burns steady, because I stayed. I loved myself through the after they left, after the breakdown, after the silence. When the world didn't check in, I held myself close. I whispered affirmations to the parts that still trembled, built rituals around repair, not revenge. And little by little, love returned to where it always belonged. I walked through my own fire. The flames weren't sent to destroy me, they were mine. Born from rage, sorrow, and everything I denied for too long. I walked through them barefoot, unsure but unwilling to turn back. They burned illusions, not truth. They scorched fear, not worth, and I emerged, not unscarred, but awake. I let the ache stay. I stopped pushing it away, stopped numbing it with noise. Pain doesn't vanish when ignored, it deepens. So I let it sit beside me, name itself, breathe. It didn't devour MIT, revealed me. And from that ache, I learned tenderness. I no longer chase closure. Some chapters end mid-sentence. Some people vanish without reason. I spent years rewriting the ending, desperate for peace. But peace didn't come from them, it came from release. Now I let things be incomplete, unfinished, unspoken, because my healing doesn't require their explanation. I refused to be small. They told me to shrink, to please, to blend, to disappear politely. But smallness never saved me. It only silenced me. I took up space in whispers at first, then roars. Now I stretch wide, take full breaths, speak my name fully, because I am not here to be invisible. I found stillness inside the storm. The chaos was all around: grief, noise, demand. But in me, a quiet pulse, steady beneath the swirl. I clung to it like an anchor, like breath in deep water. It said, "You are safe in this moment, even now." And that was enough to keep going. I released the timeline. I used to think healing had a deadline, a perfect pace. But I moved slower than others, and that scared me. Eventually, I stopped comparing calendars and started honoring my season. Now I bloom in my own time, not theirs. And that timing feels sacred, not late. I let my love return to me. I spent years pouring it outward into broken places, into silence. It went unreceived, unacknowledged, unloved in return. So I called it back, not bitter, but wiser, and gave it to the one who waited, me. Now I love in circles, not sacrifices. I didn't wait to be chosen. I stood at so many thresholds, hoping to be welcomed in. But waiting became a prison, not a hope. So I stopped knocking and built my own door. I didn't need permission to matter. Now I choose myself every time and mean it. I am the answer I was seeking. I looked for truth in others, in love, in escape. But every road curved back to the same place within. I wasn't lost. I was listening to the wrong voices. When I finally got quiet, I heard her, the real me, and she had been waiting patiently to be heard. I let my voice grow roots. At first, it trembled and shy, seeking approval. But I kept using it, even when it cracked. It grew stronger, not from volume, but from truth. Now it stands firm, not to shout, but to stand. And in its roots, I rest. I rose from the ruins quietly, no parade, no spotlight, just a quiet return. I rebuilt slowly, privately, through forgotten corners of myself. The world didn't notice. That was the gift, because some strength grows in shadow, not stage light. Now I carry my rebuild like a heartbeat, constant and mine. I forgave the younger me. She didn't know better, just survived the only way she could. I blamed her for what I didn't yet understand, but now I see her strength, not her shame. I hold her hand in my mind and whisper, "You did well," and she finally believes me. I allowed the grief to teach me it wasn't just pain, it was a mirror. It showed me where I still longed, still loved, still needed. Grief didn't shrink, MIT deepened me. Through tears, I found depth. Through ache, I found meaning. And through release, I found peace. I stopped being sorry for my fire. They called me too much, too loud, too intense. So I dimmed, softened, muted what made me vibrant. But I missed the heat of myself, the bold glow. Now I burn without apology, bright and honest, because this fire is not destruction, it's truth. I became the safe place. I waited for someone to hold me, to stay, to soften my edges. But no one came the way I needed them to. So I became the arms, the calm, the safety I longed for. Now I rest in my own refuge, perfect but unwavering. And in me, I finally feel home. I stayed when the silence got loud. It wasn't the noise that broke me, it was the absence of it. The quiet had teeth, biting into thoughts I tried to hide. But I didn't run. I sat still and let it echo. I heard every fear and unmet longing in its rhythm. And somehow, the silence softened once I stopped fearing it. I embraced the endings used to feel like failures, proof I wasn't enough. But this time, I saw them as doorways, not walls. Something had run its course, and that was okay. I grieved it, blessed it, and gently let go. Now, I meet endings with gratitude, not resistance. I let my shadow speak. I kept her buried, ashamed, unworthy in my eyes. But silence fed her, made her grow louder in secret. One day, I listened without judgment, and she wept into my hands. She wasn't monstrous, just wounded, just unseen. Now we speak together, whole in our duality. I became my own guide, no map, no mentor, just intuition, flickering like a match. I walked blindfolded by doubt, but I kept moving, and each step clarified the path beneath me. Turns out, I didn't need to be shown, I needed to trust. Now I lead myself, even when I tremble. I let the light in slowly. The dark had become familiar, its hush, its veil, its comfort. But healing knocked softly, asking to enter in pieces. I cracked open windows instead of flinging doors wide. And bit by bit, the light returned, not blinding, but warm. Now I live in balance, not light or dark, but both. I was enough before I was healed. I thought I had to be whole to be worthy. But even in fragments, I carried beauty, insight, and soul. Healing didn't make me lovable, it reminded me I already was. I stopped postponing compassion until I was better. Now I give it freely to all versions of me. I loved without guarantees, no promise, no plan, no certainty of forever. Still, I love open-handed, tender, brave in the unknowing. Because love isn't about holding, it's about witnessing, sharing, feeling. I gave what I had, not what I feared to lose. And in that risk, I found something eternal. I sat in the unfixable. Some pain can't be mended, only held. I stopped offering solutions where presence was the answer. In that stillness, I learned that witness is medicine too. Not everything needs closure. Some things just need space. So I sat, unmoving, and gave the wound my company. I held on, then let go. I gripped the memory like a lifeline, afraid to forget. But it grew heavier with each passing season. Letting go didn't mean erasing it, meant honoring differently. So I kissed the memory and released the ache. And now I carry it with peace, not pain. I am the afterglow, not the fire, not the burn, not the explosion, but the warm hush that follows the quiet shimmer of survival. I don't need to blaze to be seen. I linger softly, gently illuminating where I've been, and that is enough to light the way forward. I let my past rest. I revisited it like an old book, seeking answers, missing signs. But the story remained unchanged, only my eyes evolved. So I stopped rewriting and chose to close the chapter. Not with bitterness, but reverence for who I was. Now it rests, not erased, just honored and shelved. I stopped measuring my healing. I looked for milestones, markers, applause for progress. But healing whispered, not marched. Some days I bloomed, others I wilted quietly. It wasn't failure, it was rhythm. So I let the journey be music, not measurement. I forgave the unsaid words they never spoke, echoed longer than those they did. I craved closure they didn't know how to give, so I gave it to myself softly, without proof. I forgave the silence, not because it was right, but necessary. And in that forgiveness, I found rest. I let grief have a place, not tucked away, not hidden behind strength. I gave it a chair at my table, a corner in my chest. It didn't demand attention, it asked for inclusion. Grief became a companion, not a thief, and I became more whole by making room for it. I am the echo that stayed. They moved on, forgot, rebuilt elsewhere. But I remained in the space we once shared, not out of regret, but presence. I echo not their name, but the strength I grew from absence. And in that echo, I became something new. I survived my own silence. I didn't speak for years, not truly. Words stayed behind my teeth like frightened birds. But silence didn't protect me, it hollowed me. When I finally spoke, it wasn't with rage, but with release. And each word became a home I had forgotten I needed. I am the reminder I needed. I looked for signs, for people, for proof I mattered. But the reminders never stayed, not long enough to believe. So I became my own message of worth. Not loud, not perfect, but constant and true. Now I return to myself when I feel lost. I watched the wound bloom. Pain opened me like petals from stone. It showed me things I never wanted to see. But what grew from it was more than survival, it was poetry. A garden where grief and grace held hands. And in that bloom, I found my name again. I lived through my own leaving sometimes. We abandon ourselves before anyone else does. I did that for years, chose peace for others over truth for me. But there's a return in every exile. And when I came back, I was softer, wiser, whole. Now I never walk out on myself again. I let my softness lead the world, taught me to armor up, to sharpen. But my strength was never in my edges, it lived in my open hands. I chose softness, not as weakness, but as resistance. To feel deeply in a numb world is power, and I lead with it now, unafraid. I made peace with the past. It doesn't visit me like a ghost anymore. I stopped feeding it regret and started offering compassion. The past didn't change, but I did. Now it walks beside me, quiet and unburdened. A teacher, not a chain. I chose to stay present. The past clung, the future pulled. But I sat down with the now, trembling but willing, and it showed me everything I was missing. Each breath, a miracle I hadn't noticed before. Now presence is my practice, my prayer, my peace. I found the beauty in breaking. I shattered under a sky that didn't hold back. But in each fracture, a truth revealed itself. Not all breaking is lossome, is release. Some is the beginning of a form truer than before. And I am more whole now than when I was unbroken. I am the space between, not the beginning, not the end, but the pause, the breath, the echo. I used to think I had to arrive or overcome, but now I rest in the in-between, in the becoming. Because here, I am still unfolding. I learned to rest, not give up, not fall behind, just rest softly, bravely, completely. I used to chase healing like a race I had to win. But healing came when I lay still long enough to feel. Now I rest without shame and rise without fear. I let myself be seen, not the curated version, the real one, the one with trembling hands and too many thoughts. I showed up, messy, unsure, open, and I was met with something rare, acceptance. Now I no longer hide behind perfect. I released the guilt for surviving, for leaving, for needing more. It sat like stone in my chest for too long. But guilt isn't love, it's a weight that drags us backwards. So I lifted it off, breath by breath, and chose to walk forward lighter. I reclaimed my joy, not because everything healed, but because I deserved it anyway. Joy that wasn't borrowed or earned, just felt. I stopped waiting for permission to laugh again. And in the smallest moments, joy returned like sunlight. Now I greet it like an old friend. I let the scar tell its story, not hidden, not ashamed, just true. It reminded me of what I lived through, not what I lost. Each mark on my body or soul, a proof of persistence. I no longer cover them, I let them speak. Because healing includes remembering. I danced in my own light, not waiting to be chosen or applauded, just moving in rhythm with my own soul. I became my own celebration, my own witness. The spotlight was never the goal, it was the glow inside, and I let it shine freely. I made room for hope, not the naive kind, the resilient kind. Hope that sits with sorrow and still holds your hand. I cleared space in my chest where despair used to live, and hope moved in quietly, without condition. Now it stays like a heartbeat I almost forgot I had. I stopped apologizing for healing. Not everyone understands the path I chose, but I don't owe my softness an explanation. Healing changed, MIT had to. So I lost some things, but found my truth, and I walk in that, without apology. I accepted the unknown. Certainty was my crutch for too long, but the unknown is where the real alchemy happens. I stepped into it with shaking legs and a curious heart, and found freedom I never could have planned for. Now I trust the dark to carry me forward. I am the breath I forgot to take, the one that catches you in stillness and fills your chest. I spent too long holding it in, afraid to feel. But breath is not a luxury, it's survival. Now I inhale fully and remember I'm alive, and that is enough to begin again. I found light in the leftovers. What was discarded still held beauty. I gathered it, quiet moments, half-finished hopes, broken dreams, and stitched them into something entirely mine. From scraps, I made something sacred, and that too was enough. You've made it here. You listened, you breathed, and maybe, just maybe, you felt a little less alone in the quiet. Let this calm stay with you. Let the night wrap around you like a promise. And remember, even the fleeting can be eternal. If these words helped you drift tonight, stay close. There's more waiting for you in the next glow. Good night.